Let me at the outset sincerely thank the organizers of this event for giving me the opportunity to share some of my thoughts on this very important theme. I earn my bread and butter by trying to understand the problems, the processes associated with the evolution of the United Nations. Therefore, no prizes for guessing as to what kind of position I am going to take on this potentially polarizing debate. First, I would like to touch upon the point raised by Ambassador Surendra Kumar about the retirement readiness of international organizations like the United Nations. The scholarship in the field going into the problematic of the longevity, the lifespan of international organizations, the problems of mortality and immortality of international organizations. They have a very interesting thing to say. I thought it is essential to preface my remarks by alluding to that observation. Namely, about 65 to 70% of intergovernmental organizations like International Monetary Fund or United Nations for that matter, including NATO, they have survived. Survival is a significant achievement of international organizations, just like human survival in much of the globalizing world is proving to be. But I don't mean to say that no international organization should change. Admitting or administering changes within. Administering changes. I suppose NATO is doing it. I suppose there is disappointment that IMF is unable to do as per the expectations of the stakeholders, user community. Therefore, the G20 has tried to fill the vacuum in respect of the recent global economic crisis. So I would have thought that the theme for today's debate should have been, instead of UN, in fact, the International Monetary Fund, the international financial architecture, whether G20 is going to be more effective in terms of the management of global economic problems vis-a-vis the existing array of international economic and financial institutions. Also, let me submit that efficiency has to be differentiated from effectiveness. G20, because of various advantages of limited composition and technological advances, is able to convene fast and perhaps agree much better on some of the identified set of pressing issues of common concern among those countries. But I would like to emphasize that effectiveness is much larger and daunting domain that must be aspired for by any existing organized entity, including international institutions and organizations. G20, I would submit, is far from proving that it is anywhere the realm of effectiveness. My contentions are based on 3-4 positions. I am not saying that the United Nations is the best example of effectiveness. We are living in realities of relativity, which is better, comparativity. any collective effort at deliberating issues and then reaching commonly agreed positions will have the challenge of credibility and legitimacy. One of the foremost tests of credibility and legitimacy is the representativity. The G20, unlike the United Nations, it is not anywhere doubted that the unique legitimacy of the United Nations lies in its universality, inclusivity in terms of giving space to almost every side associated with any contentious issue on the surface of the world. Whereas the G20 representativity, inclusivity is questionable. It has been questioned quite strongly, even by the European countries. Why not Spain, for example? Why not Singapore? The economies, even going by the criterion of the economic might, some of the well-performing economies have been excluded for whatever reasons of convenience or geographical compulsions. But in other words, the G20 has preferred to become an elitist effort rather than an inclusive effort. Therefore, the consequence is the credibility and legitimacy gap. In other words, what I'm trying to submit, representativity as an ingredient of effectiveness, legitimacy is a desirable condition. Secondly, I would say, in the era of globalization, global governance has become an inevitability. The global governance is a complex domain involving a multiplicity of actors. The G20 is indeed, as the distinguished ambassador from Mexico has pointed out, is a strong event in celebration of multilateralism. Multilateralism is many, but too many will be a problem, which is the United Nations problem. But multilateralism is not in terms of qualitative production of the desirable outcomes. The global governance, in fact, represents a compulsion of interlinked issue areas. Economic development cannot be seen independent of sustainable development, or climate change, or illegal migration. Food, United Nations, for example, Secretary General recently, when he traveled to Mexico to the Group of 20 meeting, he had urged the leaders of G20 countries to pay attention to these issues, which are quite integral to the problematic of contemporary economic crisis. So, in other words, the credibility, legitimacy challenge would include addressing these issues in an interlinked, comprehensive fashion rather than in an insulated fashion. The United Nations, as it is organized today, is better equipped in terms of its open-ended nature of inviting challenges to grapple with all sorts of conceivable problems. The third point I would like to make is about the autonomy, institutionalization. For any long-term effect for G20 to have, institutionalization is essential. The United Nations is an institutionalized epitome. There are imperfections, inadequacies, no doubt about it. But at the same time, the Secretariat of the United Nations performs independent functions in terms of information generation, in terms of awareness building, in terms of legitimization, or even in terms of advocacy of certain issues, including the issue of responsibility to protect. The UN Human Rights High Commissioner takes a very, very forthright positions on Syria, Libya, and so on and so forth. So, in other words, G20 does not have an institutionalized voice to articulate, not only on behalf of its members, but also the entire international community. Unless that happens, it can never become a challenge in terms of replacing, in terms of effectiveness of the United Nations. Also, I would like to submit, as ambassador, I was very happy that the ambassador from Mexico has emphasized the complementarities. Now, the situation is so fluid that there are so many groups. Many countries are forming groups, including our famous G4, And United Nations has become a hub of all these groups, a motherboard of all these group activities. Sometimes these groups work hand in hand, sometimes at each other's neck. In other words, what I'm trying to emphasize is that the more the groups, the better for the United Nations in terms of the era of partnerships, the UN and regional organizations. In fact, the failure of partnership between the Bretton Woods institutions and the United Nations is one of the saddest stories of post-Second World War era international economic relations and management. And I hope the G20 would learn from this and appropriate lessons and build effective partnerships in a way to become something like Economic Security Council, an integral part of a renewed, reinvigorated United Nations, where it becomes the crucible for effective management of all connected problems to economic progress and poverty elimination. Thank you very much.